Some people dream of going down the Loire, the longest river in France, 1,000 kilometers from the Ardèche to the Atlantic. We are going to fly along it from Angers to Blois. A trip back in time to the era of the Château of the Loire. Gigantic, massive, forbidding. The first castles of the Loire were erected to impress and to discourage invaders. From the sea, it was easy to sail up the Loire as far as Angers, which was threatened by the Vikings. The enormity of its chateau's fortifications reflected the threat. The Château of Angers consists of a crown of 17 towers, each 50 meters high, encircled by powerful ramparts. This was the fortress Louis IX demanded at the beginning of his reign. The young Saint-Louis was not only a pious king, he was also a formidable strategist. In the center of this kilometer-long perimeter wall lurks a castle courtyard with its pleasant gardens. Invisible from the outside, this elegant residence was built on the order of King René. Good King René, the last of the Angevin dynasty. Born in 1409, in a then cold and somber medieval castle, he was understandably keen to improve home comforts, introducing newfangled windows to allow in the soft, warm Angers sunshine. Outside, the beautiful light streamed into flower-lined pathways designed for romantic trysts, strolls, and the practice of martial arts. Greedy for more territories, King René was not just a Duke of Anjou, he was also King of Naples, King of Sicily, King of Jerusalem, Count of Provence, and Duke of Lorraine. A man who was open to other worlds. King René had a menagerie in the Angers Château, with wild animals gambling in the dry moat. He was an emblematic figure of the late Middle Ages, a great prince, patron of the arts, scholar, and author. Today, the state-owned château is a national monument, with free access for the people of Angers. Maintenance of the château was a gift from royalty to the Republic, and not without cost. Renovation of the towers requires a long and complex restoration process carried out by skilled craftsmen trained in cutting-edge techniques. The challenge is to ensure good waterproofing around the walkways and turrets because the roofing of the keep was levelled off on the order of Henry III during the Wars of Religion. Modern materials, skillfully camouflaged beneath traditional paving, will never be visible. On the side of the two towers at the south corner, works foreman Manu Taffu and his team have replaced 190,000 stones. For 2 years, winter and summer, they've been scaling the scaffolding, polishing new stones, then aging them by hand so that they all present the same natural patina. Once the scaffolding is dismantled, the result is perfect. Strolling around the walkway, or better still, flying, heading towards the west side of the fortress, we find a large black roof hidden at the base of the ramparts. This wing, more than 150 meters in length, was specially constructed in the 1950s to house a huge and very mysterious treasure. Here, in the cool half-light, stretches the world's longest medieval tapestry, whose very name is enough to give you the shivers. The Apocalypse Tapestry. Woven in the 14th century, 6 meters high and 140 meters long, the scenes represented on the tapestry illustrate the revelations of St. John. This is where the divine confronts the demonic. These dramas of long ago bring to mind the disasters of today. The final scene depicts a glorious city flying away, the happy land promised to people who successfully manage to overcome their own demons. Long ago, between Angers and Saumur, salmon swam up the Loire, and numerous fisheries barricaded the river with their long nets. Unfortunately, the noble salmon have all been fished, but the species is now protected. The boats are only used for pleasure outings. Known as barges, trows, dories, keelboats, pirogues, these vessels are all flat-bottomed boats designed not to get stranded on sandbanks. Some carried salt from Brittany towards Orléans, then on to Paris. They were also used for transporting wood and sandstone for the building of chateaux. Some boat-building fanatics still construct them to the delight of fishermen and river cruise lovers. The Loire was the most used river in France, and the city of Saumur was an active port protected by the high stature of its keep. The city has a military past and present linked to the presence of this chateau, which controls the river traffic. Owned by the Counts of Anjou, then the Plantagenets in the late 14th century, the edifice became a princely chateau. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Richard the Lionheart, Philippe Auguste, and Yolande of Aragon all lived here. Passing through Saumur in 1808, Napoleon I had the imperial idea of transforming the chateau into a prison. In the early 20th century, the municipality bought the chateau from the state for use as a museum of decorative arts, exhibited in the former apartments of the Dukes of Anjou. Estelle presents here for visitors some of the 30,000 objects from the collection: porcelain, earthenware, ceramics, polychrome sculptures, tapestries, and a great many Chinese ornaments. But in 2001, tragedy struck. The ramparts that had resisted every kind of bombardment, both in local skirmishes and world wars, collapsed in the rain. Fortunately, a guild of stonemasons practices nearby in the Maison des Compagnons du Devoir, an amazing edifice dating back to the 15th and 16th centuries. Thanks to the know-how of its craftsmen, the ruins of this house, bought for the symbolic sum of €1, have become a masterpiece of craftsmanship in wood, slate, and sandstone. Here, teenagers cheerfully learn how to handle planes, hammers, chisels, and scrapers with the dynamism and dexterity of apprentice monument restorers. These pupils will soon be leaving for the Tour de France of guilds, passing on their knowledge of Saumur and the techniques learned in the proximity of the chateau. Today, the larger-than-life phantasmagoria of stone underpins the social and economic life of the area and is central to the local tourist industry. Represented here are the knights of the modern era, not the stuntmen of equestrian shows, but the city's cavalry in the form of the cadets of Saumur. The town also boasts the Armoured Cavalry Branch Training School, the National School of Horsemanship, as well as the equerries of the Cadre Noir. Alongside these institutions is the light and wonderful civilian life, with its tourists, games, wine growers, wine brotherhoods, and Saumur's great sparkling wine houses celebrating the gallop of bubbles and Bacchus taking to the skies on the back of Pegasus. Leaving Saumur, heading towards Chinon, we follow the perfect lines of a landscape tamed by wine growers across thousands of hectares. This wine-growing country inevitably attracted the author of the great dictionary of cuisine, Alexandre Dumas, who set his novel La Dame de Montsoreau here. A story of tormented lovers caricaturing the perversions of the aristocracy. The Château de Montsoreau watches over the confluence of the Vienne and the Loire. Its first owners had the temerity to set up a toll on the river, another good excuse to tax the river traffic. Located at the junction of Anjou, Touraine and Poitou, the promontory of the royal fortress of Chinon dominates a territory with a special atmosphere. The ramparts, stretching for almost 500 meters, protect the city from strong winds. The clock tower, in which the bell christened Marie Javel has reassuringly rung every hour since 1399, diligently watches over the slopes of Cabernet Franc that will fill the bottles so dear to François Rabelais. In the center of the ramparts, the Royal Lodge was witness to the first meetings of Charles VII and Joan of Arc. Joan had come to Chinon to persuade the Dauphin Charles to cross the English lands and have himself crowned King of France. It was in one of the rooms in this lodge that the first meeting took place. The legend of Chinon has it that Shepherdess Joan, having never before met the future King Charles VII, picked him out unhesitatingly from a crowd of 300 gentlemen. But in reality, Joan of Arc's arrival in Chinon had been announced in advance. She spent 3 days at the gates of the city, where it seems she had a secret meeting with the king. In the late 19th century, the story of Joan of Arc was rewritten, embellishing it considerably with the miraculous meeting at Chinon, and an army raised by the shepherdess that converged on Orléans, where, after a fierce battle, she managed to overcome the English in conditions verging on the supernatural. The reality must be quite different, for the Maid came to a tragic end. Many other occupants of these austere towers were caught up in a flight of destiny. The fortress at Chinon was the scene of many fantastic episodes in the history of the Plantagenets. It was here that the enemy brothers Richard the Lionheart and King John rebelled against their father Henry II. Their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was forced to flee, but she was caught by her husband, who locked her up at Chinon before returning her to England. After being betrayed by his wife and his sons, Plantagenet King Henry II died alone in the fortress. It was here too that, despite repenting, 75 members of the Knights Templar were imprisoned before being tried and burned in Paris, where the King of France threw a party to celebrate their roasting. Other days, other ways. Above the fortress, restored by the Departmental Council of Indre and Loire, fireworks light the sky on the big national holiday of July the 14th. The fortress at Chinon was backed up by a myriad of small chateaux and manor houses dotted around the nearby countryside, the homes of the minor nobility that gave the king their unwavering support. But let's keep close tabs on our Maid. A short hop from Chinon, in the Château du Rivau, Joan of Arc gathered her troops under the leadership of Gilles de Rais, the troubling and bloodthirsty Black Knight. The royal stables of Rivau furbished them with arms and stabled their horses. The fighting and jousting skills of Joan's knights would prove to be decisive in the engagement with the English at the gates of Orléans. O Joan, we salute you. Those who are about to die for the great Charles salute you. On April the 20th, 1429, at the hour of matins, Joan the Maid went forth from the stables of Rivau on her journey to martyrdom. We now head north from the Château of Rivau across a sea of green, the fertile lands teeming with the game that sated the appetites of Pantagruel and Gargantua. One must elevate one's spirit to reach the fabled Château d'Ussé, an edifice that evokes the sky like no other, with its rising stones and roofs, its extravaganza of pepper-pot towers, chimneys and keeps. It was renovated in the 15th century with the dowry of Agnès Sorel, the bastard daughter of Charles VII. Later, in the 17th century, this chateau would inspire Charles Perrault to pen his famous tale of the Sleeping Beauty. As the current owner of Château d'Ussé, Casimir de Blacas, correctly says, the chateau is an exceptional place. Behind it is the sprawling forest of Chinon that drew kings Charles VII and Louis XI to the chateau, who both came here to hunt. Yes, such is life in the chateau of the Sleeping Beauty. Making his way around the vertiginous battlements, the Prince Charming slipped into the secret room where for 100 years a beautiful princess, who could only be awoken by love, had been sleeping. And they lived happily ever after and had lots of children. To the despair of the cruel stepmother, who died red with shame. This joyous Renaissance morality tale would be perfect for Brother Jean des Entomeurs. Good Brother Jean, who was given by Gargantua the Abbey of Thélème, an imaginary utopia where freedom reigned, located somewhere between Ussé and Chinon. Here, a happy life would be based on the simple maxim, do as you please. The Château de Villandry can be reached from Château d'Ussé by merely following the course of the river Indre. A modest-sized affluent of the Loire, the Indre is more reassuring and less dangerous than the great raging river. Here is a peaceful setting for the tranquility of a fortunate few. The owner of this other family seat sought the perfect combination of stonework and greenery offered by the Château de Villandry and its French-style gardens. It is a joy to the 350,000 visitors who come here every year, and much admired by artists, painters, photographers, researchers, and sportsmen, received here by Henri Carvalho, a warm-hearted and hospitable owner, a passionate man who acts as administrator, botanist, environmentalist, and historian of his magnificent residence. The chateau was originally the work of Jean de Breton, François I's imposing superintendent of finances. On the foundations of the medieval chateau, using the money from his lucrative ministerial position, the superintendent built this beautiful Renaissance chateau that his peasants and vassals could admire from a distance in the surrounding countryside. In the 20th century, its doors were finally opened to the public. And here we are with Henri Carvalho in the 18th century Provençal-style dining room of the late Monsieur de Castellane, and the gallery of Spanish paintings that originally prompted Monsieur Carvalho's grandparents to acquire the Château de Villandry. Great-grandfather Joachim often went to Spain to buy works of art. Inspired by tragic and religious themes, 18th century Spanish painting is characterized by perfect technique and the restrained jollity of its subjects. One day at an auction in the streets of Toledo, Joachim came across this Moorish ceiling made up of 3,000 small pieces of cedar laid out in the mudéjar style by Arab craftsmen who had remained in Spain after the Christians had reconquered the country. From February through to March, the gardeners produce 80,000 flowering plants and vegetables in greenhouses for the kitchen garden and a summer crop. In the spring, 24,000 lettuces are planted of 8 different varieties, playing on their shapes and colors: Romaine, Batavia, Oak Leaf, Red Dolorosa, Frisée. Once fully grown, these organic lettuces and cabbages will be pulled up and given to staff or visitors to spare them a trip to the market. The boxwood topiary is shaped by sculptors, and 180,000 new plants are bedded every year to revamp the borders and vary the designs that symbolize the rhythm of the seasons, human emotions, and the radiant forces of the cosmos. The Crosses Garden, the Sun Garden, the Ornamental Garden, the Herb Garden, the Vegetable Garden, the Maze, the Mirror Garden, the Cloister Garden. And finally, the Garden of Love. Ah, love. The love of gardeners for nature, which they respect by favoring organic methods over the use of destructive synthetic chemical treatments. The love of ladybirds for ladybirds, and ladybirds for aphids. Dragonfly love, the all-devouring passion of a predator for its enemy. It is also the love of the artist for his subjects, in this case 4 gardens representing 4 themes of love. Tender love, with its perfectly shaped hearts, always decorated with flowering roses. Passionate love, with broken hearts, seeming to spin around in a dizzying waltz. Flighty love, with its fans and wings of a butterfly representing fickleness. And finally, tragic love, with its blood-red flowers between blades of daggers and swords. Villandry strives for beauty and openness. Of all the chateaux of the Loire Valley, it is the one that keeps its visitors the longest, as the gardens remain open from dawn till dusk. For strollers enchanted by the magic of nature, it's all too easy to forget the time. Time to take flight from Villandry, heading towards Azay-le-Rideau. It's simple to find, we just need to follow the course of the River Indre and of history. The reign of François I saw the emergence of a class of rich and powerful men who arrived as conquerors in the beautiful Touraine region, by now a very fashionable place among courtiers. These new upper classes had the king's ransoms at their disposal, and the recently ennobled minor aristocracy sought to assert their newfound status by building chateaux in a kingly style. Constructed in a flood zone in the middle of the River Indre, the first Château d'Azay-le-Rideau was in the Middle Ages a fortress that used the high waters and marshes as a natural moat with which to defend itself. In the 16th century, the enterprising Lady Lesbailly, wife of Gilles Berthelot, hired a master Italian mason to build a Renaissance chateau to replace the medieval edifice razed to the ground by Charles VII. Constructed on piles in the Venetian style, it can be flooded up to the level of the first staircases without any real damage. The chateau's gardeners, however, have a dislike of water lilies. In fact, they work hard to keep the water surface clean so that it perfectly mirrors the chateau on photographs. It's an annual task lasting from June till September that has to be repeated every week to control the growth of aquatic plants. Tourists are often surprised to see how much effort goes into preserving the aesthetics and making the chateau pleasing to the eye. In the 16th century, the first floor of the chateau was the noble floor. It consisted of the mistress of the house's bedroom, along with her husband's and the great hall. The Berthelot, who lived in grand style, barely had the opportunity to enjoy the splendid space, as a huge financial scandal implicated France's treasurer and forced the family into exile. Restored in the 19th century by the Marquesses of Biencourt, the chateau offers royal chambers, dining rooms, boudoirs, reception rooms and salons that were the setting for spectacular society parties held against a backdrop of Flemish and Gobelin tapestries, a gallery of royal portraits, and whole collections of pieces of Renaissance furniture, chests, dressers, sideboards, and games tables. Bought by the state in 1905, the Château d'Azay-le-Rideau is located in a charming and lively village. The community maintains close links to its chateau and bears no grudges, despite the fact that Charles VII had the entire population of Azay slaughtered when he discovered the presence of a Burgundian garrison in the chateau. At the instigation of the Centre of National Monuments, a company specializing in plaiting bulrush restored the bedroom of Lady Philippa Lesbailly. These master mat makers refurbished the 16th century room to its original condition, and the decorations, made entirely of bulrush, offer a unique glimpse of French history. The Château d'Azay is often compared to a jewel, probably because of its bijou dimensions and touching elegance. Even Honoré de Balzac was struck by the sight of it. Climbing up a crest, I admired the Château d'Azay, a diamond of many facets set in the Indre, standing on wooden piles concealed by flowers. Farewell Azay, farewell small sculpted jewel, farewell Indre, gentle river. We set off again along the Loire towards the Château d'Amboise for more Renaissance extravagance and the Italian adventure of French history. The Château d'Amboise is located within a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is also a living, natural landscape with its picture-perfect vista of the Loire Valley, the river, bridge, city, the chateau itself, and wooded slopes. Every king, from Charles VII to François I, either lived in or passed through the Château d'Amboise. The great architect was Charles VIII. He was born at Amboise in 1470 and stayed in the chateau with his wife Anne of Brittany. He put all his energy into transforming the ancient medieval fortified town into a sumptuous Gothic palace, which unfortunately proved fatal when he smashed his skull against the lintel of a low door on his way to a game of real tennis. What a pity. Another emblematic figure of the chateau is Renaissance Prince François I, friend of arts and letters, patron of Leonardo da Vinci. François I spent his childhood and adolescence here. He made of Amboise and its chateau the heart of the Kingdom of France. In the 15th and 16th centuries, the court was in the Loire Valley. The king may have been nomadic, but the court, the queen and the children were sedentary. Charles VIII ordered the building of these two colossal cavalier towers, 20 meters in diameter and 40 meters high. In every tower, a ramp winds around the central hub. With its 33 openings, the cavalier ramp is designed so that horses can be ridden directly from the city into the chateau. It loops 5 times, and it's easy to imagine horsemen, mules, coaches, and cannon carriages rushing back and forth. The pupils of the Jules Ferry d'Amboise School follow Mascot, the draft mare that has the honor of following in the footsteps of its ancestors up the Cavalier Tower. They head for the vines planted in the chateau gardens. In the royal court, more wine was drunk than water, which was very often contaminated. Grapevines then flourished on the slopes of the chateau. The landscaped parklands now resemble an oriental garden, with its 1,200 hand-shaped boxwood globes. The Saint Louis Foundation, that has owned the chateau since the late 19th century, wanted to pay tribute to the Emir Abdelkader, leader of the resistance against the French during the conquests of the colonial era. The Emir Abdelkader was held captive at Amboise from 1848 to 1852. In this garden of remembrance, designed by Algerian artist Rachid Koraïchi, lie the 25 members of Abdelkader's retinue who died during their captivity in the chateau. It is a place of reconciliation and pilgrimage in honor of the Sufi sage. In the early part of François I's reign, extraordinary parties with thousands of guests that went on for days on end were thrown at the chateau. Life at court, where the highest-ranking figures employed footmen, were a perpetual whir of activity. Marriages, christenings, diplomacy, all were deemed a good reason for festivities and demonstrations of power. Banquets, balls, and tournaments were organized under the light of 1,000 torches. The aim was to make night as light as day. Dressing up as lords or peasants, the 500 volunteers of Amboise's Association Renaissance throw dazzling candlelit parties every year. Music, dance, and light pirouette through the night. Leonardo da Vinci said, "Movement is the cause of all life," adding, "He who plots his course with that of a star never loses his way." His chapel is a star that always shines in the sky of Amboise in a galaxy that includes the Château du Clos-Lucé, a summer residence where François I spent his early childhood. This is where he lodged Leonardo da Vinci, who had crossed the Alps on the back of a mule to accept his invitation. Leonardo worked on royal commissions for 3 years until his death in 1519. In the basement of Clos-Lucé, a museum recreates the world of Leonardo da Vinci with models and presentations using the master's original drawings. It highlights the many faces of Leonardo da Vinci: marine engineer, military engineer, civil engineer, aeronautical engineer. The park around Clos-Lucé is both fun and instructive. The flying propeller, the ship at dawn, the assault tank, and the lifting devices allow visitors to play with full-scale models of Leonardo's inventions and grasp the ideas of a man who strolled through these grounds 500 years ago. They can observe the generous landscape that would be his inspiration. Amboise will be forever marked by the inventive mind of this genius of the Renaissance. It's amazing to think that 500 years ago, Leonardo da Vinci was already imagining how it would be possible to get from Clos-Lucé to Chaumont-sur-Loire by flying across the surface of the river. Chaumont-sur-Loire is the principal piece on the chessboard of women of power. Thus, Queen Catherine de Medici bought the Château de Chaumont in 1550. The estate was very, very lucrative, with the toll at the Loire and the productive agricultural land all around providing a good income. The Queen used Chaumont-sur-Loire as a high-class hunting lodge or as a stopover point between the Château of Amboise and Blois. After the death of King Henry II, the widowed and embittered Queen gave Château de Chaumont to her rival, Diane de Poitiers, forcing her to return Chenonceau, Catherine's favorite chateau. Another woman, another fortune. Marie-Charlotte Constance Say, happy heiress of the Say sugar refineries, bought the chateau in 1875 and redeveloped it with her husband, Prince Amédée de Breuil. Walking through the rooms of the chateau gives a sense that while the Renaissance brought the delicacy of Italian decorations, the 19th century brought more ostentatious decor, with interiors being given a more opulent appearance intended for flamboyant festivities. Marie-Charlotte, who became the Princess de Breuil, would receive at her table between 30 and 40 people, inviting a royal highness every evening. The King of Spain, King of Portugal, the Shah of Persia, and the Maharaja of Capithala all crossed the drawbridge accompanied by their aristocratic retinues and bearers of gifts. In the 16th century, there was no garden as such. Never mind, the fabulously rich 19th century owners moved 2 entire villages, their inhabitants and their graveyard, razing to the ground the existing houses in order to extend their ornamental gardens. The Count of Aramon planted a number of trees, particularly cedars. Then landscape gardener Henri Duchesne designed some English-style parkland for the de Breuil, featuring view corridors between trees and groves. Now extending over 32 hectares, the estate is famous worldwide thanks to the Festival des Jardins, an artistic project supported by the Centre region. This international festival is an annual showcase for landscape gardening, as well as presenting works of art linked to nature. Our flyover is an opportunity to observe around 30 gardens in Chaumont-sur-Loire, selected from among 300 projects from every corner of the world. For 20 years, this event has been a meeting place for landscape gardeners. From the beginning of spring, a series of teams stake out their respective areas in the spirit of the annual theme, Gardens of the Senses. Week after week, the ephemeral gardens evolve to attain their peak of splendor in May. They often bear poetic names. The First Morning by Klaus Pinter, Forest by Yves Jospin, Mist Sculpture by Fujiko Nakaya, as well as Garden of the Senses, Wildflower Way, Without Gravity. The public hugely enjoys this concept of new spaces of dreams and pleasure, and within 5 years, attendances have doubled from 200,000 to 400,000. It's a real success story for the staff of 50 at the Château de Chaumont-sur-Loire. Let's now head further north, over the natural splendor of the right bank of the Loire to the magnetic magic of a very pretty town on the left bank. Blois, the administrative center of Loire-et-Cher. This modern moniker seems something of a consolation prize when set aside past glories, because in the Renaissance period, the city of Blois was the capital of the Kingdom of France. Flying over the city, it's easy to see why. The royal chateau, built on a promontory overlooking the river, was secure and within easy reach of Paris. The royal chateau, then, is the focus of a town filled with delightful museums, a place full of delights for history lovers. Today, every citizen of Blois can boast of being part owner of the chateau. The 50,000 residents, lords of the chateau, are proud to open to all the staircase demanded by François I, who surpassed here his desire for elevation and greatness. This exterior spiral staircase is a mosaic of sculpted stones, with the then new feature of balconies and Italian-style loggia overlooking the courtyard. The king could thus walk out of a room to observe a court brimming with rumor and intrigue, and it was an especially good way to show His Majesty in all his splendor and greatness. And for courtiers and favorites, the balconies were yet another way of showing off. On the upper floors is the Museum of Fine Arts, with the apartments of Henry III. The King's Chamber remains the most famous room in the chateau, as it is here that the Duke of Guise was assassinated on the order of the King in 1588. A painting by Ruth shows Henry III coming to confirm that his enemy is indeed dead. "Good Lord," he says, "he is even bigger dead than he was living." A zealous servant holds out a note accusing the Duke of conspiracy, a piece of evidence which proves that royal justice is infallible. The aim of museum curators is to develop discussion on the history of art, on painting and sculpture through a thematic presentation that ties in with the chateau. This is done by focusing on important figures in the history of France, through, for example, some beautiful 19th century paintings, such as this one by Marie-Philippe Coupin de la Couperie. This is Valentine de Milan at the foot of the tomb of her husband Louis d'Orléans, the owner of Blois at the turn of the century in 1400. The beauty of this site, along with the limitless power and boundless wealth it represented, were always a magnet for jealousy and envy. The chateau is packed with statues and sculptures, symbols of the crown, and a warning to schemers and distant enemies. Thus, we have François I's salamander spitting fire, or else the equestrian carving of Louis XII at the entrance atop his emblem, the fabled porcupine, an animal that defends itself by leaving spines in its enemy. It is accompanied by the ominous motto, both near and far, a notice to would-be French, English, and Spanish plotters of the day. The enemies of yesterday are the visitors of today, along with Italians, Russians, Brazilians, Japanese, Chinese, and so on. To enable all these nationalities to better understand the complex evolution of the site, a series of interactive screens featuring virtual models explains that there are 4 chateaux from different eras, set out in a square around the central courtyard. The public can animate them, move around them, go near, farther away, summon up the figures who built the chateau, and find out about the collector's pieces along the way. Opposite the chateau, the municipality of Blois has developed an original idea for the development of tourism. A presentation pays tribute to Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin, the famous magician, Grand Master of automats and illusion, born in 1805 in Blois. As the first magician to work in a theatre, Houdin is the father of modern magic. In the Middle Ages, magicians worked on the street, although they were sometimes summoned by the prince to perform a few tricks during festivities, often performing the famous conjurer's trick known as the bonneteau, using 3 cups and a ball. The idea, of course, is to find, after a little sleight of hand, exactly where the ball is. You found it, didn't you? Jean-Eugène Robert Houdin was also a fencer, the man to whom we owe the invention of the electrical plastron that allows the number of hits to be scored in fencing. Shows of ancient fencing remind us that children of the kingdom were sent to Spanish and Italian fencing masters to become master swordsmen. There followed 20,000 deaths under the reigns of Henry III and Henry IV from duels alone. It was the duty of the kingdom's ancient capital kingdom to host Renaissance banquets, and the tradition of good food is carried on by the catering school of Blois, where young people serve and do the cooking. A local association responsible for 2,800 costumes dresses guests as courtiers for dinner in the hall of the States General. Here, the favorite fowl of the upper classes is served, turkey. While its French name, dinde, makes it sound like a local speciality from the Inde region, it was originally an American import. Turkey was a great success, replacing other medieval fowls such as peacock and swan. Aristocrats ate large birds because birds live up near the heavens. According to the food hierarchy of the day, the upper echelons of society ate the creatures that were nearest to heaven. And off we fly. It is said that anyone who leaves the city of Blois without good reason is doomed to die from nostalgia. One must set out on a modern adventure, a real adventure like that little chap so beloved of children from age 7 to 77, and it's him we're off to see. Next stop, the secret of the unicorn, Tintin and Snowy, and most importantly, Captain Haddock and his chateau. Do you remember the style of his chateau? Standing at the edge of Sologne, the Château of Cheverny is a beautiful example of absolute classicism. Beneath a dark shock of slate roofing, the smooth facades of Boré limestone whiten with age like a marquise. The extensive grounds are a challenge for any Sunday rambler. The unembellished aesthetics, the pure and regular lines, the obsessive symmetry of the whole, all this sobriety on the exterior is belied by the interior, which is a monument to French-style high life that fears neither luxury nor an overload of decorations and gilding. The entire thing seems to have been conceived in honor of a dreamlike monarchy, and yet no monarch ever occupied the king's bedchamber. But Cheverny has much more to offer. It tells the beautiful history of a family dynasty, one that is said to have furnished and maintained it magnificently since the building work was finished in 1635. Charles-Antoine and Constance de Vibray diligently supervise every piece of restoration work with the deepest respect for their heritage and a love of their family. A great reader of tourist brochures, the creator of Tintin, Oger, in search of a credible residence for Captain Haddock, probably fell to his knees in ecstasy when he discovered the architecture at Cheverny. Cutting its wings, he turned it into a more modest residence with its feet on the ground, just like his hero. Thus, in 1943, in the secret of the unicorn, the Château de Cheverny became the home base for the captain, Tintin, Snowy, Professor Calculus, and Nestor, the unfailing butler. In 2001, Charles-Antoine de Vibray, a self-professed Tintin aficionado, opened a permanent exhibition which delivers the secrets of Moulin Sarre. It would be followed by various presentations and temporary exhibitions run by the Oger Foundation and set up by the Moulin Sarre Society. This partnership attracts no less than 350,000 visitors a year. It just goes to show that editing brochures is a worthwhile enterprise. It isn't the fidgety Thompson twins who are scaring off these deer. They're fleeing a pack of growling hounds that threatens both theirs and the forest's tranquility. When one has to run to survive, running away has all the beauty of a true conquest. Fortunately, history goes on, and the conquest of new horizons will take us to other skies.